Hello, everybody. We are live. Chuck Holton here, coming to you from my studio in Panama. And we've got some breaking news about the ceasefire deal in Israel, in Gaza specifically. And it's not good news. The news we have is not great. And before I get into all the details, I just want to know how closely you've been following this ceasefire, the news that's been coming out every week. And do you think that the hostage trade, hostage prisoner swap that was agreed upon by Hamas and Israeli negotiators was a good deal for Israel? Do you think that was a good plan, or was it a terrible plan? And would love to know kind of how you think it's been going. Because I'll tell you one thing, it's when you watch this closely, it seems to me like Israel has been subjecting itself to what amounts to Chinese water torture. They agreed to a plan where Hamas gets to essentially retake control of the Gaza Strip, get a tremendous amount of aid brought in, more than they were getting before, get hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of prisoners, terrorists, released back into Gaza, who were, many of them convicted of heinous crimes against Israel. And in exchange for all that, Israel gets 3 emaciated hostages released each week, which are then paraded through a gauntlet of screaming barbarians, forced to put on fake smiles and pretend that they are grateful to their captors, display, I don't know what they've gotten, like diplomas. I don't know, like some kind of certificate of achievement. I spent 490 days in Hamas captivity, and all I got was this stupid certificate, something like that. I don't understand what the point of all that is. But I will tell you that if you talk to people in Israel, if you talk to the Israelis about all of this, it is torture. If you were a Muslim extremist and you were a brutal sadist, but I repeat myself, and you were tasked with designing, excuse me, you were tasked with designing a circumstance with which to torture the entire people of Israel and make it as painful for them as you possibly could, but you weren't allowed to actually kill any Israelis. I don't think you could come up with a more sadistic plan than what the Israelis have agreed to with this ceasefire deal. They have sat there and received every week just drips and drabs of a couple people alive. Of course, very happy to see those people come out alive, but they obviously have been mistreated. The stories that have been coming out about the way they've been mistreated while they were in captivity is just stuff that I can't repeat on this show. I mean, some of it just unbelievable. And yet, you look at the Palestinians that are being released into Gaza, and it is they're released to a gigantic party, a huge celebration in which they're feted as heroes, raised up on shoulders and paraded throughout town as they wave weapons and commit themselves to more violence against any Jews that they come across. To call it heartbreaking is an understatement. To call it cruel to the Israeli people is an understatement. And yet the Israelis are willing to put themselves through this just to get back any of their hostages. So far, they have received they've received 16 of the 33 that they were supposed to get back under the first phase of the deal. And now Hamas is saying that the deal is off. They're not going to go through with returning any more hostages because they say Israel has been breaking the agreement, the ceasefire agreement. Now, I'm not sure exactly in what way Israel could be said to have broken the deal, because they've been allowing 600 trucks a day into Gaza. There have been 30 to 50 fuel trucks a day entering Gaza. Much of that aid is being allowed to go up to the north. The Israelis have pulled troops out of Gaza to the point where the number of IDF still in the Gaza Strip is at the lowest level since the beginning of the war. They have pulled out of the Netzarim corridor. They've allowed Gazans to freely move back into the north without any kind of checks or inspections, which means that Hamas is moving troops and weapons and ammo and missiles and rockets and whatever they have left back into the north to prepare for further combat against Israel. Israel is essentially allowing Hamas, and they're watching. This is a crazy thing. You watch or you listen to footage from Gaza that comes out on the AP every day. And in almost every clip, you hear the buzzing of drones overhead. So that Israel is watching all of this take place in real time. In one sense, that's a good thing, because Israel is no doubt keeping track of the movements of these people and watching very closely and trying to pick up clues if they are bringing in weapons, or if they are fighters, or if they're moving any kind of military hardware. I'm going to make a guess as to what we will see in the coming weeks. It looks like the ceasefire agreement is breaking down. And I sort of, believe that would be the case all along. We know that at least 10 or 12 of the initial 33 hostages that are supposed to be released are no longer among the living. And so, yes, they want to get their bodies, their remains back, but in reality, it doesn't make that much of a difference. They'll get them back eventually. And they're not going to get any deader. I'm not trying to be crass. I'm just saying that as far as, look, is it worth it to torture yourself and to allow yourself to be taken advantage of, and to allow Hamas to declare victory and to rebuild their forces and to move back into the areas you've already cleared, and no doubt reset a bunch of improvised explosive devices and things that are going to definitely cause more IDF casualties when the IDF inevitably has to go back in there? Is it worth all of that to get out the few living hostages that are left? Well, the Israelis have decided that it is. And that they will go to any lengths to try to get some of their people out. But is it worth that kind of pain and torture to get the cadavers of Israelis out that you could eventually go in and find anyway? They will get those bodies back at some point. However, this is the uh-oh, are we cutting out? Okay, a little bit of a lag there. I am on the Starlink, folks. So sometimes I think the Starlink is going to choke when a cloud goes by or something like that. But it looks like we're back here. Looks like we're doing okay. Folks, we got about 2,000 people online. Do me a favor and hit the subscribe button and the like button on this video. It just takes a second. And I always forget unless I get reminded. So I want to remind you to please hit the like button. It does make a difference in the analytics and everything. The algorithm will show this video to more people if a lot of people are hitting the like button. And if you have a second, you're going to want to go over to chuckholton.com because what we're doing is we're now taking the content of these lives and we're condensing them into written form in a kind of summary where you can get all the main points of the live. And we're putting them up over at chuckholton.com so that you can share them with your friends easily, send them around with email, whatever. But you're going to want to go and subscribe to chuckholton.com to do that. We're going to be also giving, well, we're going to be releasing another documentary here soon. I'm working on that today. And so there's a lot of great stuff coming, a lot going on. Okay, so Hamas says that Israel has broken the ceasefire agreement. Well, actually, as I look at it, I don't see anywhere in the hostage prisoner swap agreement that gave Hamas the right to create a giant spectacle every week and make that spectacle as humiliating as possible for. Okay, well, I'm gonna connect to Wi-Fi here too, and maybe that'll get better. Make that spectacle as humiliating as possible for the Israelis, making them watch as their loved ones are paraded through a gauntlet of masked terrorists screaming and pushing and jeering at them. They're doing this to every one of the Israelis that gets let out. I haven't seen that happen at all. Israelis are not doing that at all to the Palestinians that get let out. That seems to me like a real kind of breaking of the agreement, without a doubt. I mean, there's no question Hamas doesn't have the right to do that under the agreement. So, with that in mind, well, we're just going to have to see what happens because the IDF is now saying that they are preparing forces to move back into Gaza. And I think it was Katz, Israel Katz, gave a statement that said they're preparing for every contingency. And some people are saying that we got problems, and some people are saying it's fine. Don't know what to tell you. Switch over to the Starlink. Yeah, if you're having audio issues, just hit reload. It should be fine. Okay, so Katz is saying that they are planning to go back into Gaza stronger than they have before. They're planning to put more troops into Gaza than they've ever had in Gaza if they have to go back to fighting. And as I have been saying, I think that it most likely is going to come to that. We are going to see a breakdown in the ceasefire. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu has sent negotiators back to Qatar to sit down and start talking about going to phase two. Phase two would see the complete removal of troops from Gaza, and they would maintain about a half-mile buffer all the way around the edges of Gaza. That buffer, by the way, has already been breached. There were some videos coming out yesterday of Palestinians coming within 300 meters of the border fence near one of the kibbutzim that was attacked on October 7th. That obviously is going to be a non-starter for Israel. Israel's not going to go for that. But I just don't think we're even going to get to this. And here's what I think is the real issue. I don't think Hamas was ever planning to get past phase one. And we're to the point in phase one where almost all of the living hostages have been released. Now, folks, do you think, I'm going to ask you a question. I want you to answer me in the chat. Do you think that Hamas will ever give up all of the remaining hostages under some sort of a peace deal? Is there any peace deal that Israel could make that would get Hamas to give up all of the living hostages? I'm not worried about the dead ones. I'm just worried about the living ones. Is there? Because I don't think so. I really don't think Hamas would ever give up all of the living hostages because that's the only leverage they have. And if that's the case, it looks like you all agree with me. So if you guys agree with me that Israel is not going to get back all of its living hostages in any way, there's no chance of them getting them back, then in phase one of this ceasefire deal, they have gotten back almost all of the remaining living hostages that were supposed to be given up in this deal. There are 24 left that they say are alive, but we're not sure, that we don't have much proof on top of the ones that they said they would release in this one. You recall that in this first 33, the first phase, those Bebas children, the mother and the two Bebas children were supposed to be released, reunited with the father, Yarden Bebas, who was already released. But Hamas said back in 2023 that the Bebas family had been killed by an Israeli airstrike. Now, you can't trust anything they say, of course. But obviously, it's a real issue. I mean, the Bebas family, if they do not come back alive, and I don't think they will, unfortunately. I think that the children and the mother were killed one way or another. I don't know who did it, but I don't think those children are coming back alive. They're supposed to. They're on the list for this first 33. And I think Hamas knows that when they turn over the corpses of two Bebas children, then it's all over. Israel will not stand for any more, and they'll be done. They'll be done playing. And Hamas sees that day coming where they're going to have to turn over the rest of these hostages that were agreed upon in the first part of the deal. And when people find out the Bebas family is not alive, then it's done. And there are 24 more, they say, living hostages that are left after the first 33 get out. And again, about 10 of those 33 are already not among the living. Why didn't they release all the living? Why didn't they insist that we want all the living hostages out? Hamas would never agree to that. It's not going to happen. Hamas will not give up the remaining living hostages. They just won't. And so after looking at the last 3 that were released, these 3 men that were released, come on. There we go. Okay, connection's back. So these hostages are saying that they were given between 1/2 and 1 pita per day of food. I mean, they haven't had a real meal for months. And the Israelis are pretty upset about that. Now, you still have this very vocal minority of Israelis who are saying, do whatever it takes, agree to whatever the Palestinians ask in order to get back the rest of the living hostages. But I think that's a fool's errand, because they're not going to get back all the living hostages. They're just not. Those people are as good as dead. And that's a terrible thing to say. It's a terrible thing to think about. But if the Israeli government listens to the people who are saying to just roll over, surrender, do whatever it takes to get all the remaining living hostages out, what those people are really advocating for, even though they don't mean to, they're advocating for more hostages to be taken, because that is what will happen. You are showing the Palestinians that you care so much about your own people that you would rather lose more of them to get back the ones that they have. And that calculus teaches the Palestinians to continue to take hostages. I've said this for more than a year. It's a terrible, terrible decision to have to make. But I believe, personally, this is my opinion, Israel is going to have to make that hard choice to say, you know what? We're going to write off the rest of our hostages, and we're going to make sure that you never have the ability to take another hostage ever, ever again. I think the real thing that's making Hamas want to say that the deal is off, they're not going to give back any more hostages. There's no serious observer that would look at what's going on in the last several weeks and say that Israel has broken the agreement. No serious person that's been watching this thing could make that case, because Israel hasn't broken the agreement. If anything, Hamas has broken the agreement. But the thing that is making Hamas put this pressure on Israel right now is the statements that have been made by President Trump about moving all of the Palestinians out of Gaza, essentially for good. Now, I watched the interview where President Trump was asked specifically by Bret Baier, could the Palestinians have the right to return? And what Bret Baier was talking about was, after you rebuild the Gaza Strip, can the Palestinians return and live here again? Trump answered that question and said no, but I think if you watch the video, I think what it shows us is that in actuality, Trump was answering a different question that he thought Baier was asking, which is, can the Palestinians return to the northern part of the Gaza Strip now? Do they have the right to return now? And Trump said, no. It's because you watch Trump's answer. He says, no, it's rubble. There's nothing there. There's nothing for them to return to. But so they're kind of got their lines crossed a little bit. Bret Baier was asking, can the Palestinians return after the Gaza Strip is rebuilt? Trump said no. And everybody's taking that like he meant after we rebuild the Gaza Strip, the Palestinians can't come back. That wasn't what he was answering. At least it was apparent to me that that's not what he actually was answering. But I think the Hamas is seeing that and saying, oh man, Trump is going to take the handcuffs off. And so we've got to ramp up the pressure on Israel. And so they're holding a gun to the remaining hostage's head and saying, we're not going to give them back unless you make some more concessions. This is normal, natural Hamas. This is what Hamas does always. And this is why they can't be allowed to continue to govern. And so, in my opinion, the IDF is going to have to go back in to Gaza with force and continue the fight. It's my guess. I could be wrong. Maybe you disagree. But it seems to me like this is what Israel knew was going to happen all along. Because they're prepared. They're ready. They're ready to go back in. Hamas is intentionally doing this to try to create division within the Israeli people. And it's working. If you go back to yesterday's live and see how I was talking about, Saturday's live. And I was talking about scare tactics used by Russia, but scare is an acronym. And if you go back and look at that, you can go to chuckholton.com and there's an article about it up today that has the acronym and what it means. But it's scare is the 5 ways that Russia uses to divide the American people against each other. And they're very good at it. Russia has become an expert at this kind of information warfare and psychological warfare, getting Americans at each other's throats. Because if you can cause Americans to just, fight each other, then there's no reason that they'll be much less able to come and fight you. Hamas is taking a page out of Russia's playbook and is using those same scare tactics to divide Israelis in order to conquer them. And just like I have said in Ukraine, in the war in Ukraine, I'll say the same thing about Israel, that whoever wins the information war is the actual winner of the war. Look, Israel has been cleaning Hamas's clock on the ground. They go in and, according to Israeli estimates, they've wiped out 17,000 Hamas operatives so far in this war. They have taken out 80, 85, 90% of their missiles and rockets. They've found hundreds of thousands of weapons and munitions and explosive vests and all sorts of things. And they've taken all of those out of commission. They have destroyed hundreds and hundreds of tunnels. And so, from a purely kinetic standpoint, on the ground, Israel's a clear winner. But what I have been saying, and I will continue to say, is that it doesn't matter if they lose the information war. And with lots of help from the mainstream media, lots of help from the US government under Joe Biden, and lots of help from the United Nations, so far Hamas is winning the information war. And if Israel does not make Hamas pay so dearly that not only will they not have the ability to threaten Israel anymore, but they won't even have the desire. That's how bad you have to beat them. Go back to World War II. We faced an intractable enemy in Japan that was willing to sacrifice essentially all of its people in order to triumph. There was no, all of its soldiers. The Japanese military hierarchy called their foot soldiers isengoren, which is Japanese for 1 cent. That's because it cost 1 cent to send a postcard to their family to let them know that their soldier had been killed in battle. And to Japan, that's all their soldiers were worth. Just 1 cent. That's what they called them, isengoren. Hamas is even worse. They don't just see their fighters as expendable, they see their people as expendable. And they even celebrate when their own people get murdered because they understand that that's what helps them win the information war. If they win the information war, then they win the war, period. Doesn't matter what kind of losses they take. It doesn't matter if they turn Gaza into a giant parking lot. It's even better if they do, because they turn Gaza into a giant parking lot. That's more ammunition to win the information war. You see what a dilemma that presents for Israel? It's a terrible, terrible place for Israel to be. But what Israel needs is strong leaders that can see clear-eyed about what their options truly are. Because the options are win or lose. That's it. There's no draw when it comes to Hamas. There's no tie. You can't tie with Hamas because they won't ever stop. So, folks, we got almost 3,000 people online. Do me a favor, hit that like button. I'm going to go back and go through some of the questions real quick. I think we have some moderators online. If one of your mods see a good question, just highlight it, pin it to the top so I can see it, and that way I can see them better. Michael Salazar says, is Israel also gaining intelligence and retooling as well? Yes. Without a doubt, they are gaining lots and lots of intelligence from this, where all the places where Israel has been, you can bet that there are lots of means at their disposal of collecting intelligence on people who come back into that area. I really believe that one of the only reasons that Israel even agreed to let people back into the northern part of Gaza was because they have salted the entire thing with sensors of different kinds, and they have the drones and other capabilities overhead that are going, they're waiting to see who comes back to the north. And they're doing this in order to refresh their target lists. That's what they want to do. Believe me, I believe they have had plenty of time to rebuild their target lists now after all these weeks. So we're looking at, do they continue torturing the Israeli people to get back 1 or 2 or 3 people? Or do they say, that's it, that's enough, we're done, and we're coming back in and we're not going to stop until it's over? Now, one of the things we've learned, or at least it's become clear, obviously the IDF has not put this out, the Israelis have not put this out, but it's become clear as you watch footage coming out of Gaza that the IDF had an unspoken objective for the war. Their spoken objectives were destroy Hamas, get back our hostages. That's easy. The unspoken objective was make sure the Gazan people pay for supporting Hamas in the first place. And it's one of the reasons why, not the only reason, but it's one of the reasons why the IDF has this policy that if we determine that a building, a house, any kind of structure was used in any way militarily against the IDF, then that thing is coming down and we're going to bulldoze it. And they have a very low bar to meet to decide whether or not those buildings were used for military purposes. Very low bar. And oh gosh, this one was painted green. Green's a military color. Let's go. I mean, I'm being facetious. I'm not saying they went that far, but I don't think they had to go that far because it was fairly clear from the beginning that Gaza was a giant military base masquerading as a civilian population. And that almost every building was used in some way or made to be used in some way as to help Hamas fight Israel. And so that's the reason why so much of of Gaza has been, I need more coffee today. That's why so much of Gaza has been reduced to rubble. I think under the laws of war, Israel had every right to do that. They are continuing to do that. In Lebanon, they're finding more and more tunnels and weapons caches and things like that that present a clear military threat to Israel in Lebanon. And even under the agreement that they have with the Lebanese government, not with Hezbollah, but the Lebanese government, to have a ceasefire in Lebanon, they're allowed to continue to destroy those types of facilities. They just recently found a large tunnel that was dug under the border between Lebanon and Syria to allow weapons and contraband to come into Lebanon from Syria, most of it supplied by Iran. And the Israelis destroyed it. Tony Bobo says, let the Gazans live in the rubble. Well, that's where they're living now. Donald Trump making all of this noise about we're going to own Gaza, we're going to rebuild it, we're going to make it into a giant resort area. It's going to be great. It's going to be beautiful. I mean, you can look at that on the face of it. It's patently ridiculous what he's saying. But as I've said before, he may just be crazy like a fox. And he understands that by talking like that, he's poking at Hamas and goading Hamas into making it so that the IDF has to come in and destroy them. Some people would not give Donald Trump that much credit. The media certainly doesn't. The media certainly doesn't give Trump that much credit for being smart enough to play that kind of 4D chess. But let's give him the benefit of the doubt. I would prefer to believe that President Trump understands enough and is just audacious enough to talk about things like this, knowing that they're not really feasible, but that they will definitely stir the hornet's nest, and that agitation will cause progress to be made in the Middle East. But just like he did when he talked about taking over the Panama Canal, which they're not going to do and they haven't done. Just like he did when he talked about Mexico paying for the border wall, which they didn't. And lots of other things. I think you can look back and you can say, okay, either he's a stable genius, like he says, or he's just plain crazy. And I don't think you get to be the person that Donald Trump has become in terms of his previous accomplishments by just being flat out nuts. So I think that this is a strategy that he's employing to twist Hamas's arm, to kind of force Hamas to you know, cook or get out of the kitchen, so to speak. And maybe to make people start to think outside the box a little bit about the future of Gaza. As I said, even though the Gazans themselves say it's not going to happen, we're not going to leave. The Egyptians say we're not going to take them. The Jordanians say we're not going to take them. The Saudis say we're not going to take them. Nobody's willing to take them. The best thing to do would be to ship them to China, where there's, millions of empty apartment buildings all across that country. We got to airdrop all of the Gazans over China and say, look, there's lots of free housing. Go for it. Yeah, China wouldn't go for that, of course. But all of those naysayers notwithstanding, President Trump talking about doing this, about the U.S. taking over the rebuilding of Gaza, is forcing everybody to think in possibilities and not realities. And like the president said in his inauguration speech, impossible is what Americans do best. That was my favorite line of the whole speech, by the way. That was really good. Hunter in LA says, do you think that Israel will be able to find out the tunnel entrances when all the Smurfs go underground when the war starts again? Well, without a doubt, Hunter, they have been, is that Los Angeles or Louisiana, by the way? Without a doubt, the IDF has been watching carefully from the sky as Hamas operatives come out of the holes that they were hiding in once the IDF leaves. And it's very likely that the IDF has established or has identified some more tunnels that they're going to need to destroy when they do go kinetic once again. That we will see when they do that. Look, Israel might be masochistic in their desire to get out as many live hostages as possible, but they ain't stupid. And they are extremely clever. We have seen, thank you, Los Angeles, Hunter. I'm sorry, Hunter, Louisiana would probably be, you should try moving to America instead of living in California sometime. Just kidding. So I'm sure you'd agree. The IDF and the Mossad and the Shin Bet and the Israeli government have proven to be very, very adept at thinking clever thoughts in terms of beating their adversaries. President Trump, somebody asked if I thought Trump was going to send in U.S. troops. There was a little bit of confusion on Amir Tsarfati's channel because he said that the Southern Command has been given instructions to prepare to resume bombing or to start attacking Gaza if the ceasefire completely falls apart, which we'll know on Saturday if that's going to happen. And some people thought that Southern Command that he was referring to was the U.S. Southern Command. That's not the case. He was talking about Israeli Southern Command going back in and preparing to start up combat operations again in Gaza. Lyle Smith says, would Israel consider flooding the tunnels when they go back in? Well, I wish they would. For some reason, they decided that it was not feasible to do last time. And Eric Prince believes that was a very big mistake. I mean, they probably didn't make that decision for no reason. But again, I just think that maybe they weren't willing to try it, or it was too logistically difficult for them to do. I don't know. But, or they thought that's where most of the hostages are being held, and we don't want to be drowning all our hostages. I can't imagine that they would allow the hostages to drown. because again, Hamas needs those hostages. They need those living hostages as bargaining chips, and that's why they're never going to let them all go. Question in relation to scare, why do the U.S. and Russia oppose each other? It's an interesting question, Anomi. It's not really germane to our discussion here, but the short answer is that the United States was making lots of overtures toward Russia during the Obama administration and trying to overcome that and become their friends again. But Russia desperately needs an enemy to galvanize their people and convince their people to accept lots of hardship and suffering. And so they need an existential threat. The government needs an existential threat to convince the Russian people that they've got to keep working hard against the evil Americans. That's a short answer anyway. So I see she keeps asking that question. Best I can do with just a minute. What about Trump talking about Canada becoming 51st state? He was being facetious about that. There's no scenario where Canada becomes a 51st state. They're just not. And I don't know if I mean, this is something to ponder. President Trump, like I said, I don't think he's stupid, but there are things that he is misinformed about. No doubt about that. And, a person can be misinformed. They can be forgiven for being misinformed. You can't know everything about everything. I mean, and the president really is in a position where he kind of needs to be able to speak on almost any subject, right? And so he's got to have people. What it tells me when I hear President Trump say something that is provably false, like the United States lost 38,000 Americans building the canal. 38,000 people died when the United States was building a canal. And that's provably false. The first time he says it, okay, well, maybe he misspoke or he just misunderstood the finer points of that topic. I certainly can, have no problem with that. But when he continues to say it, and he's still saying it now, what that tells me is that President Trump is not surrounding himself with people who feel empowered to tell him he's wrong. And that's dangerous. If you're in a position of power like that, you desperately need to have at least a few people who can tell you to your face that you're an idiot, so that you can avoid actually being an idiot. You need people who will correct you when you say something that's incorrect. And say, well, Mr. President, actually, it's not 38,000 people. 22,000 of those people died when the French were in Panama, not the United States. And only 5,700 people died as the United States was building the canal, and only 350 of those people were Americans. So it might sound better to say that 38,000 Americans died building the canal, but it's just not true. So maybe you shouldn't say it, Mr. President. That kind of thing. He needs people who can talk to him like that. And it does not appear to me that he has people who will talk to him like that. Maybe you disagree. Let me know if you disagree. Chuck, why not just shut all the aid down completely till they're returned? Yeah, I don't understand why they ever allowed aid in. Well, because under the Geneva Conventions, you cannot use food as a weapon against a civilian population. So the only way that would be feasible is the way that Israel has been doing it. And that's to go to a neighborhood in Gaza, surround that neighborhood, and then tell all the people that are inside and that are in the neighborhood, okay, if you are not a terrorist, leave. and you have to come out through a checkpoint. We're going to check you. We're going to make sure you're not on one of our watch lists. We're going to make sure you're not somebody we're looking for, and we're going to make sure you're not carrying any contraband weapons or anything out with you. But you can freely leave. And once you have, we've given you 48 hours to get out, we're going to go in and if there are still people in there, they're going to be considered hostile, and we're going to deal with them as such. And we're going to go house to house, door to door, room to room, and we're going to completely search the entire area, and we're going to destroy any building that appears to be a threat. That's the only way you can actually do that. And we're not going to allow any aid into that area until we're finished with that operation. So you can't do it on the level of Gaza in its entirety while there are still 2-point-something million Gazans in Gaza, because obviously some of those people are women and children and they're non-combatants. So you just, under the rules of just war, you can't do that. But you can do it for a neighborhood, for an area, a certain area. And you just go area by area, neighborhood by neighborhood, and you close them off, you clear them out, you stop all food and water from going in there, you search every square inch of it, then you open it back up again, you move on to the next one. That's smart. And that is what Israel has been doing for some time now, actually, okay? Did you see the news that the PA is ending their pay for slave program? I did see that. Let me explain for those of you who don't know what they're talking about. The Palestinian Authority has had this program that has been euphemistically called pay for slay for many years. The United States gives over $300 million a year to the Palestinian Authority. We pay for their police force. We arm their police force. We train their police force. Some people in their police force have actually been found to be terrorists that attack Israel, but we still do it. And the Palestinian Authority takes maybe not the exact dollar bills that we're giving them, but they take some money and they use money that they have to give stipends, monthly paychecks to the families of people who have committed terror acts against Israel. And they recruit people to commit terror against Israel by this program. So if you're broke and you're on the outs, I mean, we've all had that probably. We've probably all been at that point, at some point in our life, where we just were so broke that, I mean, broke was a goal for us. Broke was up there somewhere. And we'd love to just be broke. Maybe you're in that position right now. If you're a man and it's your responsibility to feed your family and you're in that situation, you start looking at the ski mask, looking at the bank, looking at the ski mask, looking at the bank. You're desperate and you're looking for any way out of that situation. Well, if you're Palestinian, you've got a way out. All you have to do is go run over a few people in the greater Palestine, or take a knife and run around and try to do a slashing. Just go commit some kind of shenanigans against the Israelis, and there you go. Even if you die in the process, the Palestinian Authority will pay your family $3,000-$4,000 a month in some cases, or more, for the rest of their lives. Now, what the Palestinian Authority says is, well, we don't use any of the money that the U.S. gives us to do that, for that program. We use U.S. money for other programs, and then we use money that we would have used for those programs to pay for this pay for slave program. Well, they just announced that they were going to stop doing it, but in actuality, that's not the case. What they've done is they're reassigning the pay for slave program to another department. They're shuffling the cards, so to speak, and they're going to continue that program under different auspices. They're doing that so that they can go to the UN and say, see, we're playing nice now. We're not supporting terrorists anymore. and continue to get money and aid from the United Nations. But if you look closely at what they're doing, it's a big shell game. All right. Okay, so we're coming down to the end here. Somebody lives in Southern California. Question. IDF says they're on high alert and currently scanning Yad Mordecai community after signs of suspicious movements. How possible is it for Hamas to attempt another October 7th during the ceasefire? There's definitely a non-zero chance of that happening. I mean, they're supposed to be in a ceasefire. People's guard is down, maybe. Hamas sneaks in and grabs another 25 or 50 hostages and takes them back into Gaza, and then we have to start this thing all over again. This is why I'm saying Israel at some point has got to say, you guys claim to have some of our hostages left alive, keep them. We're going to proceed as if they are not. And we're going to make sure that you will beg us to stop by the time we're done with you. And not only will you never be able to take hostages again, you will never want to take hostages again. That's what this has got to come to at some point. I mean, that is the end state of this. It's either that or Israel loses. There's no in between. Okay? All right, that's all I've got, folks, for today. Please share the podcast. Again, we're going to be releasing my new documentary very soon over at chuckholton.com. So you're going to want to go over there and subscribe. And you can get free copies of my book, Death of Civilization. This is a lesson, folks, for the United States and how we should be dealing with our adversaries as well. You know, the Houthis are down there marshaling their forces. I saw a video today of a bunch of guys dressed like sand people out marching around, like thousands of them. And the Houthis are saying, we're going to war with the United States. Well, guess what? They might just get what they're wishing for very soon. So stay tuned, because I think that if there is going to be an instance where President Trump sends U.S. troops into harm's way, because he is very averse to that. He doesn't like to do that at all. But if we see U.S. troops in actual combat sometime in the next few months, it's going to be in Yemen. So keep an eye on Yemen, folks. We'll do more lives about that before long. Before we go, just real quick, because the chat keeps going after I sign off for a while. So I want you to write down what conflict, issue, geographic area, whatever you would like to see me doing lives about in the next week or two. Okay, we're headed off to Cartagena, Colombia at the end of this week for a few days, and I'm going to be reporting on the fighting that's going on the Venezuelan border next week. So that'll be interesting. Can I report from a naval ship? Brian, I think you meant naval as in N-A-V-A-L, naval as in the U.S. Navy, not naval as in your belly button. But I have reported from U.S. Navy ships several times in the past. I don't have any plans to do so in the near future, but stay tuned. You never know. All right. God bless you. I'm going to see if I can stop this without just cutting it off like I have been. Okay, so we're going to